So, Sam Harris is a member of the intellectual dark web. The intellectual dark web. I know I'm using the term seriously, but just bear with me. It includes people like Sam Harris, Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, the Weinstein brothers, Dave Rubin. That is the intellectual dark web. Now, Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed, unfortunately, to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court of the land, of course, and it determines the law of the land. And basically, once the Supreme Court makes a decision, that's it. That's final, right? Now, Sam Harris, a lot of you guys have a lot of criticisms of him. It seems that I am often defending him a lot. But you guys are about to hear a big breath of fresh air from Sam Harris. He just absolutely goes in on Brett Kavanaugh. Now, in the beginning, when he mentions that he has heard things from people who have been giving their opinion on this issue, and they're sort of diluted. He's talking about people like Ben Shapiro and other people in the intellectual dark web. He has just decided not to name them because I think he wants maybe to be more respectful. I'm not sure what it is, but it's very obvious he's talking about people like Ben Shapiro and the conservative people in the intellectual dark web. Now, Sam Harris absolutely goes in on Brett Kavanaugh, and he pretty much debunks any sort of talking point that there is from the right in defending Brett Kavanaugh, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. This is going to be quite a clip, but I strongly, strongly recommend you watch the entire thing. I did. It is really great. So check it out, and then we're going to come back and talk about it.
It is amazing how divided the country is on this. And there are many people who I respect who appear to be, to my eye, completely confused on this issue. Here are the main things I've heard. My view will become clear to you in a moment here. First, there are all the people who are viewing this like a criminal trial. They're saying, whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? Are we going to let mere accusations from 36 years ago, presented without a shred of evidence, completely destroy a man's life? Right? That seems to be where many people are defaulting to. Most people drank too much in college, and most of us have things we did in our past that are embarrassing and that would be mortifying if they were made the subject of a Senate hearing. So where does all of this stop? That's where the ethical and political ballast is for many people. The idea is that we should be abiding by the criminal standard here, and that if we don't, this could happen to anyone. I think that's ridiculous. This is not a criminal trial. The question isn't whether Kavanaugh should be put in jail. The question is whether he should be given one of the most consequential jobs in American society for life. Now, whatever happened 36 years ago, he did enough in that hearing to make an impartial person think that this man doesn't belong anywhere near the Supreme Court. For instance, he lied repeatedly. Okay, this is not debatable. More or less everything he said about his yearbook appears to have been a lie. You might think the problem is with this process, right? We have a process that now entails ambushing good people with embarrassing facts from their adolescence based on pure partisan malice and opportunism. And this would force even good people to lie. Right? We have a corrupt process that is guaranteed to make good people behave unethically. So he had to lie. I just don't think that's true. Right? He didn't have to lie about any of that stuff. In fact, lying in the way that he did played for me like a failed intelligence test. This was an IQ test, right? The first question was, what does boof mean? Right? Now, I'm prepared to say that there is no universe in which the word boof means flatulence. Kavanaugh and I are nearly the same age, right? I think I'm 2 years younger. Every guy my age in the country knows what the word boof means. Perhaps this is a further effect that Trump has had on our politics. Even the quality of our lying has deteriorated. It used to be that lies had to be believable to function properly. Apparently, that's no longer the case. The physics of lying has changed, at least for Republicans. Anyway, as has been said repeatedly, this was a job interview, a horrible job interview, granted, but an interview nonetheless, and it is entirely reasonable to hold the view that Kavanaugh failed it. And one can do so without it being a sign of one's partisanship. Another way to take partisanship out of it, at least for me, is that everything I think about Kavanaugh, I also think about Bill Clinton. In fact, Clinton is worse. Again, this is not the criminal standard. Should Clinton be in prison for what has been said about his sexual indiscretions? No. But we know enough to say that the guy has been a colossal asshole. He's trailing at least one fairly credible accusation of rape. And whatever you believe about that, there's no problem forming a general picture of his sexual ethics. Now, where he falls on the Harvey Weinstein continuum, I don't know. But he was not a good guy in this area of his life. One does not have to be partisan to acknowledge that. Now, another concern here that's arising in defense of Kavanaugh is that now it appears to be open season on men. The Me Too movement, whatever its underlying merits, now has somewhat the character of a feminist moral panic. Now, I'm somewhat sympathetic to this concern. If you go far enough to the left on the political spectrum, you do find people who appear to have been driven insane by thinking about sex and gender and the politics of hooking up. But the question is, does any of that apply in this case? And it seems to me that it doesn't. Now, those who do think it applies in this case think one of two things. They think either that Blasey Ford is lying, she's just making this up, or they think she's mistaken, and that we have good reason to believe that she's mistaken. And here I feel people are just failing to think in a Bayesian way about prior probabilities and how we should update our sense of what's true based on current evidence, the way people are behaving, what we know about human nature and incentives. This really, it doesn't seem so mysterious. Now, think about this claim that Blasey Ford might be lying. This is actually something that I touch kind of on the fly in today's podcast, but I'll give you a more systematic analysis here. Not knowing much about a person, what's the probability that a woman would decide to destroy her life in this way by going public with a false accusation of this sort? What's the probability that a woman would decide to destroy the lives of two men and those of their family members by making this sort of false accusation? I mean, I've seen incredibly dumb tweets about her seeking a book deal and seeking to be famous, and this is an extraordinarily unlikely thing for a person to do. Granted, it could be made more likely if we knew more about her, if we knew that she was a fame-seeking sort of person. You sort of know it when you see it. But did Blasey Ford present in that way at all? She was the antithesis of that personality. She can't get away from those lights and cameras fast enough. So that the fame-seeking idea seems completely crazy to me. It just seems bizarre to believe that she would have been talking about this problem for at least 6 years, preparing the ground to unveil her allegations should Kavanaugh ever get nominated to the court. And again, this is based on some vindictiveness that has no explanation because she's lying, right? She's never been victimized by Kavanaugh in any way. And if she were going to lie about this, would she place a witness in the room who, also being accused, would seem likely to be hostile to her account? She put Mark Judge, his friend, in the room, and she's urged the FBI to speak with him. Is that the sort of lie you would tell if you were making this up? This does not have the hallmarks of a lie. Conversely, all of the probabilities and incentives are aligned in the other way for Kavanaugh. He appears to have spent most of high school and college as a drunk Christian jock asshole. There are not many people in public life who, when you scratch the surface on them, what you hear celebrated about them in their own yearbooks and even in books written for publication about them, is how hammered they got as teenagers, continuously. Now, I say this as someone who drank way too much throughout high school and college. Virtually everyone was a binge drinker back then, but not everyone made it central to their identity the way Kavanaugh and his friends did. Given what we know about Kavanaugh, what's the prior probability that he behaved like a total jerk with girls? It's not small. This doesn't prove her allegation, but we know how drunk guys find themselves in those situations. And you add the frat house atmosphere to this guy's entire life, it only raises the probability on a not especially low probability phenomenon. And then when you acknowledge that we have already noticed him lying in the aftermath of this allegation, without question, the guy has perjured himself. So then the question is, how likely is he to be lying about this? And what are the incentives for him to lie about this? Well, the incentives for him to lie about this are enormous. There's nothing mysterious about his behavior. Her behavior would be astonishing on many levels if she were making this up. And then there's the idea that she's telling the truth too, but this is just a horrible case of mistaken identity. Well, then you just have to be clear about what you're claiming. We all have this picture of mistaken identity as being a real problem in solving crime. A woman gets attacked or raped, and then she has to, pick the guy out of a lineup, and she picks the wrong guy. And we've seen this in movies, and we know it must occur in the real world. This is a very different situation. We're talking about a person being attacked by someone they already know. What's the likelihood of misidentifying someone you already know when a social situation turns into a sexual assault? It's not to say it's impossible, but we don't have details that suggest it's possible. Under her cross-examination, she wasn't led to say it was very dark, and she was talking about making eye contact with Mark Judge and trying to read his demeanor. We have the picture of a well-lit room where she knows who's on top of her and she knows who's jumping on and off the bed. The idea that she could be mistaken and would remain mistaken every day thereafter about the identity of the person who she already knew seems very far-fetched. And finally, Kavanaugh's demeanor and behavior at that hearing are entirely compatible with his guilt. Now, it's true that much of his demeanor and behavior was also compatible with his innocence. I think his getting angry and emotional, all of that was also compatible with an innocent man being blindsided by a false and life-wrecking accusation. But the way he danced around the issue of the FBI, the way he clearly didn't want further investigation of these claims, that was really telling for me. In addition to his other lying and just some of the dumb things he did in his testimony, that's where his behavior suddenly became incompatible with his innocence. If you're innocent, you want the FBI to talk to every person on Earth, unless you have some argument that the FBI is an incredibly partisan organization and is itself working to sabotage you. If you know this didn't happen, and she's put another witness in the room, you want the FBI to talk to that witness. Of course you do. He just struck me as having something to hide the moment those questions came. He was remarkably evasive in a way that he must have known as a judge would make him look shady, and yet he did it anyway. Right? So he was willing to take the near-term reputational hit of seeming less than innocent. Why would he be willing to pay that price? Because he doesn't want any more of this stuff to come out. Or I would say that's the most plausible interpretation. So anyway, we'll see what comes out this week. He may, in fact, be on the Supreme Court by the end of this week. Anyway, I'm amazed that people are seeing this the other way and think that somehow the most plausible version of what happened here is that we now have women who are just eager to lie about their experience of this guy.
So, like I said, if you were able to make it through that video, he just obliterates Brett Kavanaugh and rips him up into complete shreds. So First of all, he goes after the idea that it's a criminal trial or a criminal investigation, which is not what it was. It was a voluntary testimony done, and he explains that basically this was essentially a job interview. We are the Senate Judiciary Committee, which is obviously a small committee within the Senate. The Senate, as in its entirety, is supposed to decide whether or not he is fit to be a justice on this to sit on the Supreme Court. So what it is pretty much a job interview. That is what it is. We're trying to determine whether or not, or at least the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate as a whole, is attempting to figure out whether or not Brett Kavanaugh is fit to serve as a justice on the Supreme Court. That's what he is attempting to do. Now, what he accurately explains is that Brett Kavanaugh was what I'm going to call a serial liar. I think that's the best way that I can put it. He just lie after lie after lie. It was insane how many lies he told. And Sam just explained there. He says, I'm like 2 years younger than Brett, and in no universe does boof mean flatulence. And it's not even that's not even remotely like if you go on Urban Dictionary, you go all the way back, there's nobody with that. There's no flatulence for boof. That's not what it means in any way, shape, or form. Same thing with Devil's Triangle, where he said that, Devil's Triangle is a drinking game, and he was able to get away with it very heavily because basically what he did is he asked the senator, I think it was Senator Whitehouse he was speaking to, and he asked him saying, have you ever played quarters? And I guess quarters is a drinking game. I don't know. I'm guessing you flip it in and drink. I don't know. But basically what he did is he asked Senator Whitehouse the question, and then upon the question of, do you know the game, he responded with no, and so that was like a get out of jail free card for Brett Kavanaugh. So he sort of tried to dodge that by saying that. You see what I'm saying? And so he lied, saying that it was a drinking game. Really, what a Devil's Triangle apparently is, according to Urban Dictionary, is it is a threesome with two dudes and one girl. That is what it is. It's, you form a triangle. It says that the guys aren't supposed to make eye contact, and I guarantee you Brett Kavanaugh made eye contact 100%. But anyways, there were many other lies. Another one, for example, he was asked the question of, did you have any connections to Yale? Now, here's the thing, and people constantly strawman this question by saying, because the response is, the truth is that his grandfather actually went to Yale, so he's a legacy admission. Now, the thing is that just because his grandfather went to Yale doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only reason why he got in, and it's a straw man if you claim that that's what I'm claiming. What I'm saying is, if somebody asks you, do you have any connections to Yale, and you say no, despite the fact that your grandfather went there, that's a lie. You're lying under oath, because what actually happened is you did have a connection and you just lied about it. Whether or not that's the reason why you got in is not the same question that we're talking about here. And he made a bunch of other lies too. Like he said he hadn't seen the testimony by Christine Blasey Ford, which was a lie. He actually had seen that, which was and also there was some witness tampering going on. So with the second woman, Deborah Ramirez, who actually alleged sexual assault by Brett Kavanaugh, what had actually happened is he claimed that he found out about those allegations when it broke with the New York Times story, but the friends of Brett Kavanaugh, there were friends of Brett Kavanaugh who came out saying that we have these text messages from Brett Kavanaugh in which they said that he knew prior because he was messaging us trying to get us to corroborate on my side. Basically, it was Brett Kavanaugh attempting to change what they were going to say. That's something known as witness tampering. So he's witness tampering on top of all of that, and he's lying massively. So this is the type of monster that we're dealing with here, right? A serial liar, basically. And Sam Harris obviously explains that why would you none of those things you had to lie about. Like Devil's Triangle, you could have said what it was, boofing. It wouldn't have looked good, but Republicans don't eat their own, as I already explained. That's not something that they do. They don't care what you did. It really doesn't matter to them. I mean, even Roy Moore almost got elected. He barely, by a slim, slim margin. failed to get elected. Now, Sam also speaks about how there is an insane amount of actual motivation and intent for Brett Kavanaugh to deny these allegations and to lie, because obviously his seat on the Supreme Court is resting on this. And he explained that basically the idea that there is a significant amount of motivation or rationale for lying on the part of Christine Blasey Ford is absent. There is no strong reasoning for Christine Blasey Ford to actually lie. There is none of that, because she can't even live. She can't even go back to her home right now. Do you guys know that? She can't even be in her own home. She has to live outside of her house. She's at some hotel or something like that. She'd had to set up a GoFundMe because of all the security costs and all of that stuff. Like, she's a professor who, I don't know how much she makes, probably like 100 or maybe a little bit less. I don't know how much, but she has a serious career. There is no way this person is going to risk the destruction, absolute dismantling, absolute demolishment, and just complete, ripping apart of her, career. That's not what she's going to do. And so there is a lack of strong intent, or really any intent to lie at all, especially because it was a voluntary testimony as well. And if you watch that hearing, you know that she seems super credible. She's an intelligent person who's clearly making sense. And also, I want to make this clear too. Do you remember that Lindsey Graham fit that he threw to basically position himself to get the attorney general job when Jeff Sessions is removed later? I don't know when he's going to be removed, but whenever he gets removed, Lindsey Graham apparently wants the AG job, the attorney general job. So he, when he did that fit, apparently that's because he wanted to cut off the prosecutor who was going to start asking questions about the date on the calendar that matched up with Christine Blasey Ford's account of what happened and recounting of what happened. And after that fit that Lindsey Graham threw, they never went back to the prosecutor. So it's insane how much stuff was really going against them. But also another thing is, Brett Kavanaugh was not fit to sit on the Supreme Court. How could you possibly see video of two occasions? One of them, Senator Whitehouse asking him about alcohol, and Brett Kavanaugh says, he responds to the question of like, do you like beer, Senator? Like, how, on what earth is that actually something that is appropriate for a question, like for a person who's being questioned under oath, a sworn testimony to respond with? Now, he also did that to Senator Klobuchar. This one was even worse, and I'll tell you why. It was really bad. So she asked him whether or not he ever blacked out drunk, which makes sense because it's like, okay, we know you're a heavy, unbelievably sloppy, aggressive drinker. It would be very significant. The information of whether or not you've ever blacked out drunk is very, very significant information. And Kavanaugh responded not once, but twice, asking Senator Klobuchar if she's ever blacked out drunk. Now, let me pause, because I know whoever of you idiots support Brett Kavanaugh, you're going to say, oh, but, it was justified. Then why did Brett Kavanaugh apologize like a minute later? He said it twice, and it took him so long to realize that he completely butchered it. And then he wrote an op-ed later on saying that he was too emotional because it made him look horrible, because what he did was horrible. He looked like a complete imbecile because that's what he was. And the FBI investigation was a complete sham. It was completely limited in its scope. Kamala Harris just questioned Christopher Wray, the FBI director, on this. And upon the questioning of whether or not the FBI investigated whether or not he lied under oath, he said that he could not respond to that, which is like, why can't you respond to that? You don't have to tell us what the results of the investigation are. Don't tell us the contents. Just tell us yes or no. Did you delve into that area? That's all you have to tell us. And he didn't do that. So That's sort of the situation that's going on there. And the college roommate at Yale of Brett Kavanaugh came out and said the FBI hasn't questioned me even once, despite the fact that he's the roommate in college. How are you going to have a legit FBI investigation into these allegations? Not even speak to the main two people involved in this investigation. They didn't follow up with Brett Kavanaugh, and they didn't follow up with Christine Blasey Ford, because Kavanaugh dodged a bunch of questions. He lied. So for consistency purposes, and also there's a complete different way that the FBI gets actual answers, and so you basically get two different how should I put this? Two different routes of getting information, and then you compare the two. So they didn't do that. And then B, they didn't even speak to the college roommate at Yale. That's unacceptable. That is unacceptable. It really is unacceptable. And the FBI investigation was just a complete joke. And it's a sad thing that he is sitting on the Supreme Court now. But I do have to say, big ups to Sam Harris, because he just absolutely spoke a breath of fresh air, especially with being in a group full of so many idiots.